what some of the scholars mention, al-hukmu ala shay far'un an tasawwurihi, which means giving a judgment regarding anything is a branch of how one conceptualizes that subject. Meaning, the concept you may have in your mind regarding anything is what judgment you will give regarding that thing. When you give any judgment regarding it, if you have a misconception regarding that thing, you will give the wrong judgment. But if you have the correct concept, you will give the correct judgment. Today, when we discuss Khilafah, Caliphate, we must go through some concepts which people have regarding Caliphate before we look into the obligation of establishing the Caliphate. We must analyze those concepts or misconceptions people may have regarding the Caliphate itself. By way of example, we have some people thinking that the Caliphate means global domination. This was mentioned or popularized by George W. Bush after the 9/11 attacks, where he mentioned that some Muslims have an ideology of global domination. Of course, those groups were funded initially by the CIA themselves, meaning the groups that have a concept of caliphate, of being global domination, were groups that were funded by the CIA in the 1980s in Afghanistan. But traditional Islam, meaning Sunni Orthodox Islam, the followers of the four schools, do they believe that the caliphate is something for global domination? The answer is no. Because when you look at the books of theology, even though the books of theology only mention the caliphate due to some aspects of caliphate relating to the beliefs of certain groups, because there are certain sects that believe that the successor of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was stipulated, and therefore they dispute with Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, orthodox mainstream Muslims. But when you analyze the concept of caliphate in mainstream Sunni Islam, you will realize that the caliphate is not something which has been legislated for global domination. The Muslims do not dream or fantasize of ruling the entire world, because this is not a reality which will happen. Meaning, habitually, this is not something that happens maybe in the history of humanity. There are only a few exceptions that have been mentioned of rulers that ruled the entire globe. So this concept is a misconception, that when people discuss the caliphate, they tend to think that caliphate, meaning Muslims and non-Muslims, segments of the Muslim world, when they hear the word caliphate, they think the meaning of caliphate is that the Khalifa, the Caliph himself, is based in a Muslim city, but his agenda is to dominate and rule the entire world. This is false. And like I said, this was popularized by George W. Bush and other haters of Islam. Likewise, another misconception, that when people hear the word caliphate, they think, or khilafah, they think that this means that the khilafah must be established within the UK or other non-Muslim countries. And of course, the people who popularized this were people in the late 90s and early 2000s who would carry banners saying Sharia law for the UK, popularizing this concept amongst Muslims and non-Muslims, because many people unfortunately do not take their religion from classical sources, meaning whether that is classical literature, Islamic literature, or classical ulama, studying with ulama. They take their religion from the media. So when they saw people carrying banners, Sharia law for the UK, Islamic law for the UK, or in areas of London, you had people patrolling areas claiming that they are establishing Sharia law. This gives the concept to so many non-Muslims and Muslims alike that the Sharia law is something that is established, or the Caliphate is something that is established in non-Muslim countries. This is also a point used by fundamentalists, Hindu fundamentalists and Buddhist fundamentalists currently in Burma, that whenever they have a Muslim minority that they need to persecute, they claim that that Muslim minority is asking for Sharia law in a non-Muslim country. Meaning, the perfect tool, the perfect reason to give justification of persecution of any Muslim minority would be that that Muslim minority is asking for Sharia law in a non-Muslim country. So if there is a group of people asking for Sharia in a non-Muslim country, then that is used as a justification of persecuting those Muslims. But in reality, in classical Islam, we know that the Caliphate is to be established in Darul Islam, meaning in Muslim countries. The Caliphate as an obligation to be established, a communal obligation, is to be established in Muslim countries, not in non-Muslim countries. So any Muslim who calls for the Caliphate in non-Muslim countries is mistaken. And they are a cause for discord, meaning they cause discord where the majority population will then oppress the minority Muslims who are living in peace with the non-Muslim majority. This is another misconception, again, when we hear the word Caliphate. And in reality, these things are done in order that people dislike Khilafah, Caliphate. Meaning, when you associate Islam, the Kaaba, the Quran, with terrorism and with violence, then people have an aversion, a natural aversion for such concepts. Likewise with the Caliphate, when the Caliphate is associated with establishing that Caliphate in non-Muslim countries, then that non-Muslim population has a justification for violence against Muslims. Relating to this is violence against non-Muslims or non-Muslim minorities. But a question also linked to this is Sharia law applied upon non-Muslims? So many Muslims are under the assumption that Sharia law is established upon non-Muslims. In reality, within the 4 schools, they have a dispute. Some of them say that the Khalifa or the ruler has an option. If he wants, the non-Muslims, if the non-Muslims want, they can come to the Khalifa and request the establishment of certain Sharia laws upon them. Meaning, if they want to go to Islamic courts, they can. But the Caliph has a choice of turning them away. They are free to follow their own laws, meaning their own laws according to their own religion. This is why in a Muslim country, is it permitted for a non-Muslim to sell pork? The answer is yes. Is a non-Muslim permitted to trade in wine and alcohol? The answer is yes. But if you go on the road and ask a common Muslim that if Sharia law was established in Pakistan, will the Christian population be permitted to drink and to sell alcohol? Most Muslims will say that they are not permitted to do so. Why is this? Because again, they have the wrong concepts of Sharia law. Meaning, an ignorance of Sharia law brings in an aversion towards Sharia. So when people hear that Sharia law is to be established, non-Muslims, when they hear this, they think this will curtail their rights. This will do away with freedom of religion for non-Muslims, will do away with other freedoms for non-Muslims, when in reality, Islam is not a totalitarian religion. What demonstrates this? What demonstrates this best is the example of Sayyiduna Umar radiallahu anhu, as narrated in the Musannaf of Abdul Razzaq, that when Sayyiduna Umar radiallahu anhu walked past a house, he heard laughter and voices of people. It was very clear to him that they were drinking, partying and drinking. Sayyiduna Umar radiallahu anhu jumped over the wall and went to investigate. He attempted to open the door when the man from inside the house came out, and he said to Sayyiduna Umar radiallahu anhu You have trespassed after having suspicion. So what did Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu do? He turned away and left him. This example shows that the Khilafah was not a totalitarian system, meaning where people are not free to do what they want. What was prohibited was a public display of certain sins. A public display of certain things like obscenity laws, meaning there is an application of Sharia which in today's day and age we would call obscenity laws, meaning if someone in public is doing something, then the Sharia applies to them. But in the privacy of their own homes, the Khalifa or the state, if we can use that term state for a Khilafah, will not force themselves into the house of an individual unless of course there is concern for public safety. But otherwise the obscenity laws apply to public display of obscenity, not private actions of individuals. So when people, non-Muslims and Muslims, when they think of Khilafah state, they will think of something like Hitler's Fourth Reich in Germany. They will think of something like Stalin's secret police. This is the image that they will have. So the concept of Khilafah, if they have the wrong concept, then they will never accept Khilafah as being something just. Likewise, the rights of minorities. Because recently we've had the formation of groups like ISIS, where they persecute non-Muslim minorities and displace minority groups from regions which they have been living in alongside with Muslims for hundreds of years under the pretext of jizya, which is the protection tax which is taken from the non-Muslims, which is optional for the ruler. It's not an obligation, meaning he has an option to do this. But based on that, they displace peaceful non-Muslims. So when people observe that non-Muslims are displaced from lands in which they have been living in for hundreds of years, even during the Ottoman rule and during the Abbasi rule and during the Umayyad rule, and now they observe groups who have their ideological rooting in American funding, ideological roots with the CIA, not with traditional Islam. When they observe those groups removing non-Muslims from those regions, they think that non-Muslims will be persecuted if the Khilafah is re-established. So the only thing that ISIS and Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi achieved is presenting a malformed image of the Khilafah, of what the actual Khilafah is. So Muslims and non-Muslims alike now have an aversion towards the Khilafah because of what they observed with the practice of ISIS, displacing people. But in reality, when we go back and observe Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, when he went to Palestine, he saw a group of people, blind beggars, Christian beggars, and he asked, "Who are these men?" They said, "They are Christians, old men." Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu said, "Give them a pension and do not allow them to beg on the streets. Give them a pension. We do not take from them in their youth and leave them to rot on the roads in their old age." Why? Because the non-Muslims give jizya to the state, and taking the jizya is optional for the Khalifa, the Caliph, even though the amount of jizya taken from non-Muslims is less than the amount of zakat taken from Muslims. So Muslims give more to the state than non-Muslims. But when they reach old age, the state gives them a pension, so they are not left to beg on the streets. This is why the majority population of Syria and Egypt remained Christian for nearly 500 years, because Islam was not enforced on the people. The only time when the majority became Muslim is after the Crusades. Check the books of history like Al-Bidayah wa Nihaya and the history of Ibn al-Athir. Ibn Kathir is the author of Al-Bidayah wal-Nihaya, but check also Al-Kamil fi Tarikh of Ibn al-Athir. You will find that the majority population of Syria and Egypt remained Christian up until the Crusader period. This was because of the justice of the Muslims, meaning the system which the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam left us with, or the law the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam left us with, was so just to the non-Muslim population that they enjoyed living in the Muslim country. So this again is another misconception that is commonly portrayed, not only in the media, but where people take their education regarding the Khilafah. Likewise, application of hudud punishments, meaning corporal punishments. Corporal punishments in Islam, meaning the lashing and stoning, which is mentioned, is this punishment applied without its conditions being met? The answer is no. The conditions must be met. So in the time of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anh, there was Amur Ramada. Amur Ramada was the year of famine, where a group of young men, they stole a camel, they slaughtered the camel and they consumed the meat. They were brought to Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anh. Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anh did not apply the punishment upon them. Why? Because of the famine. Likewise, regarding minorities, there is a story of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anh, that the conqueror of Egypt was which companion? Amr ibn al-As. His son, one of his children, he had a famous son, Abdullah bin Amr. Another son named Muhammad, he insulted a Coptic Christian. A Coptic Christian. The Coptic Christian was slapped by the son of Amr ibn al-As. The Copt went to Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu in Al-Madinah Munawwarah, taking this complaint. When he took this complaint to Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu demanded, summoned Amr ibn al-As and his son Muhammad. And he ordered the Copt to slap the son Muhammad, but not only the son, also the father Amr. Why? Because he said, your leadership was the cause of your son committing this act. Meaning your son presupposed that he will be justified in doing this because his father was the governor of Egypt. This was the justice in the time of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu for minorities. Likewise, the incident of Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, when a Jewish man made a claim against Sayyidina Ali, the Caliph, when Sayyidina Ali was Khalifa. Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu was taken to court as Khalifa by a Jewish man, a poor Jewish man. The judgment of the Qadi, the judge, gave a judgment in favor of the Jew. The Jew responded by reciting the testimony of faith. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They asked, why did you accept Islam? He said, I wanted to test the justice of Amirul Mu'mineen, the leader of the believers, and your religion. And he found justice within the Khilafah. So this is precedence for us regarding Khilafah. But today people are taking precedence from what they observe on television. Meaning, where Muslim men are forced to grow their beards, there is no Islam being inculcated in the hearts. Meaning people are being forced to grow beards. So when ISIS are removed from certain regions, you observe the men shaving their beards. When in Sharia law, there is no enforcement of growing the beard. In any book of Sharia, if you check the Quran or the books of Hadith or in the books of law, you will not find that the Amirul Mu'mineen, the leader, is obliged to force the men to grow their beards. Even though if he does give such a command, it would be an obligation on the people to follow, because it relates to those things which are permitted, meaning it relates to those things which he is allowed to enforce, but there is no obligation on him to do so. So what makes Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi and ISIS think that in a time of civil war, the most important thing for people to do is to grow their beards? Meaning people are hungry, people are being killed, and the most important thing they deem is that people must grow their beards. So of course people will have misconceptions regarding the Khilafah. So the hudud punishments are not applied during civil war. Even in Mosul, when certain groups, they were fighting in different regions of Iraq, when they would take over a city or a region, they would apply Sharia law. How can they apply Sharia law when there is civil war? So what these groups would do, if they took over a certain area, they would apply Sharia law, hudud punishments, corporal punishments, when in reality hudud punishments are not applied during such scenarios. But this goes back to the foundational problem, which is having an incorrect understanding of what Khilafah is.